Hey everyone, I'm Natalie Ivey, and I'm really excited about today's episode, The Power of Persuasion in HR. I have a special guest, Cindy Skalicky, the author of the new book, Red Light, Green Light, and we're going to talk about something that doesn't always get attention, persuasion. This is an episode of skill building and communication tips that you won't want to miss.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the HR Investigations Podcast, the show for HR professionals who deal with complex employee relations issues and want to lead with clarity, confidence, and compliance. I'm your host, Natalie Ivey. Today's episode is all about something that doesn't always get enough attention in HR circles, persuasion. Whether you're presenting investigation findings to leadership, coaching a difficult employee, or advocating for corrective action, how you deliver the message matters just as much as the message itself. To help us explore this topic today, I'm excited to welcome a special guest to the show, Cindy Skalicky. Cindy is a messaging strategist, executive coach, and the best-selling author of the new book, Red Light, Green Light, How Top Leaders Present with Polish, Get Buy-in, and Become More Influential. Cindy's work helps leaders craft high-stakes messages that inspire action, win buy-in, and move audiences from not sure to hell yes. That's exactly the kind of influence HR professionals need, especially in sensitive, high-pressure situations. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Natalie. It's so great to be here.
So in HR often gets into a position of having to influence without authority, and many times we're not the final decision makers, but we still need executives to listen, to understand, and act, and that's where persuasion becomes essential. And in your book, which I read, by the way, is awesome, right?
Thank you.
Red light, green light, and you introduced something called the how-to model, and I love that because I'm always talking about the importance in training programs of actually giving people how-to practical application skills.
Yes.
Yeah, can you walk us through what that how-to model is and how HR professionals can use it to frame their messages effectively?
Yes, absolutely, I can. And it's a great tool. The how-to model is a ticket for audience members who are listening. Friends, this will help you get your audiences of stakeholders from kind of that red light of risk to the green light of go concerning the idea that you are bringing and putting on the table for them to accept. So I want to paint a little picture to explain the model, if that's okay, Natalie, because it's helpful to listen to it in a situational context. And here's my idea. You tell me if this would be fitting. I'm imagining the listeners here maybe sitting in an audience at a large SHRM conference or an HR conference, and they're in a breakout or a main stage session listening to a speaker. And let's just imagine for a minute that the speaker is about to create a presentation, and they're going to posit that instead of doing annual reviews for employees, that you instead bring in at least quarterly one-on-ones with your leaders in order to have a better touch point with them, improve culture, and have a better feedback loop. Okay, so let's just imagine that the status quo is annual reviews and this person gets on the stage and they're going to try to convince, this audience of HR stakeholders that they should do quarterly reviews. Just a basic example. The how-to model is an acronym. And so each of the 5 letters in the words how to stands for a different thing, which I'll say in a minute. But if you would all just sit in the audience with me, facing the stage of this person who's about to present this information, the how-to model takes us through what you as an audience member are expecting that speaker to do. What do we expect of a speaker who's trying to move us to a decision, to action? How does someone on the stage actually persuade us? So when we're sitting in that chair and we're looking at the stage, we're asking the speaker from the very beginning to H, hook me, get my attention. H is hook me. O is orient me. Okay, orient me to what this talk is about, person on the stage. What is the problem that we are trying to solve? What situation are we in? Which would be about why annual reviews are not enough, and maybe a personal story there. Then we would go into the W of the model, which is us as audience members asking the speaker to win us over. Okay, win me over to something that you have. What's your better idea? Okay. The better idea in this situation is unveiling the reality that quarterly reviews are proven to have a better impact on retention, for example. Okay, so we've gotten our audience to feel hooked, oriented, and we've won them over to why we're there. The T is tell me more. So we're asking the audience or the speaker to tell us more. Why should we do that? What are the reasons? What is the rationale, the data behind it? Maybe some personalized storylines. And the final letter in the how-to model is O for offer me. And that's just another way to say, what is the ask the speaker has of the audience? So as an audience member, we're sitting there like, offer me something I should do. Should I just buy into this? Should I actually do something, set up a call, ask for money, get a signature? What's the ask? So to wrap that up, the how-to model is when you use all 5 letters, you're probably in a formal setting, Natalie, like the one I just described. But the letters in the how-to model can be used in conversation, and you might not need all 5, right? If you looked at chapter 9, the how-to scrabble, you can break it up. But the point of the model is that we are always sitting in the chair of our audience member, our stakeholder, while we create the message, lest we make it all about us and forget that we need to meet them where they are.
Yeah, that's so, and I'm so glad that you used that example with being an audience member and also with performance reviews. I've been in a situation with an HR professional that was overhauling the performance management solution and didn't do the how-to model at all, and it crashed, burned, and one of the executives was very upset, tossed a slide deck across the table, said that it was BS, and her approach was really not making it more effective. She actually made the review even more voluminous. Totally lost them even at the very beginning. And one of the things that she didn't do was also come prepared. She did not really have, she sort of stammered and stuttered at the beginning. And it was sort of, okay, so we're here to talk about the performance reviews. And okay, that was kind of her approach. Not sound confident. It was almost like, oh, so we are going to sit down and play Scrabble. It kind of came across.
Oh, gosh. Right.
Not assertive. It was not confident. It was not thought out from the standpoint of you really do have to win that audience over. So,
yeah. Well, she started with the filler trifecta that we don't want to start with, which is so yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
But do not start with so yeah, my friends.
Oh, there you go. Thank you for that. Best practice right there.
Right. Yes.
All right. Now, one of the things I know about HR professionals, and I've been around for a long time, struggle with is, especially when they're conducting investigations, that's sort of the space that we operate here at the company RPC. Well, when it comes to presenting those investigation findings, you've really got to keep your message clear. You've got to be confident. You don't want to sound biased, and also you don't want to get too emotional. In your book, Cindy, you talk about the power of storytelling. How can HR professionals use storytelling techniques to make their reports or presentations more persuasive without compromising objectivity?
Great question. And storytelling is so powerful in your situations, Natalie, that you're talking about because of a simple function of story. Story, if some audience members might know this, but storytelling is 13 times more powerful than a piece of data. So 13 times more powerful than a fact. And that's a fact, but why is story powerful? So I'm thinking of story in your instance, Natalie, about maybe a person who might tell a short, concise example story about another person who faced this similar situation of an investigation, and hopefully maybe how they succeeded in getting through it with the HR member as a team and getting what everybody wants, right? Maybe we tell a success story of some sort. The storytelling component is powerful because it removes us from our own context area and puts us into another one, which is the character in the story you're telling. And we begin to think in the ways they might be thinking or feeling in the story that's being told. And I want to debunk a myth here for a second, Natalie, which is that story has to be long.
Yeah.
I have found in recent years that there's a real reticence for a lot of leaders to play with storytelling and story because they feel this pressure to tell like the best story ever of J.K. Rowling quality, right? And the answer is no. Story can be short. It should be short, but it also should be simple and it should be specific. And those are some key pieces about why stories are helpful and what a few words on how to make sure you're hitting the mark with a story.
Yeah.
A story will orient your audience. And that is what, in most cases, speakers are lacking when they're throwing decks across the desk, like you shared earlier. The thing that you said, Natalie, is that basically that speaker did not orient the audience at all. But this is also the biggest downfall of speaking effectively when trying to persuade. We over-assume where the audience is in relationship to our idea when we start to speak, and we forget to level set. Yeah. And the level setting happens with a short story.
Yeah, and absolutely, especially in investigative work.
Yes.
A lot of the HR business partners or employee relations managers, they've been hip deep in investigating something like sexual harassment, and they've been working on this for several weeks, and it's all fresh in their minds and in their head, and they really understand maybe if perhaps the subject in a case really behaved in a way that was very egregious, and they might be sitting with a leader who, I don't know, maybe the subject is someone who's well thought of and a rainmaker, and maybe there's a little pushback and not necessarily wanting to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
You know, the storytelling of if we look back in our case solution and we see that we had a very, very similar case, let's say 2 years ago, say, somebody will kind of walk you through that and maybe the ramifications where we didn't hold someone accountable and maybe there weren't even could be legal ramifications because our remedy to the egregious conduct was not strong enough. It led to maybe a claim of retaliation. Something like that. Yeah.
Natalie, I wanted to share one more thought, if it's okay. I was looking through your work and the work that you do, and you fall into a category, in my opinion, of a place where, you know, with investigative work that you do, like it's touchy, it's kind of hot, and it can be conflict, sucking. And so I would put you and your industry of people who are really specializing in this investigative nature, that is harder communication. Okay. It is more difficult. And storytelling, I'm imagining if some of your audience members are like, well, I don't want to tell a story about some famous guy who got, sexual harassment. Who am I going to tell a story about? Right. So I would say, there might be people stories that you would use and that are past cases, depending on the severity of the investigative reporting. However, it also could be true that you'd want to go the route of like metaphors and analogies as a way to contextualize the point you're trying to make. So you could sit down with a person and say something like, for the last 18 months or so, you've kind of been in the right lane of productivity on your team. We need to move you to the left lane and then the express lane. And that's our goal with this PIP, this performance improvement plan. So that's maybe a softer way to use story versus feeling that you always have to make it about a person, because sometimes that's not going to help. It could actually shoot you in the foot, and we don't want that. So storytelling needs to be thought of in a way that's a little broader when you have difficult industries like yours.
Yeah, excellent. I love that. And, what we're not doing here is telling fairy tales. We're telling the truth clearly, and, that clear narrative, that's often going to really help the decision makers to grasp the facts, especially when they might be presenting investigation findings. Yeah,
exactly. It's serious work. It's difficult. It's serious. There's not a lot of time for play and humor, at least in the serious parts of your conversations. Yeah. So that's what I'm gathering.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about presence.
Sure.
Sometimes those, like you mentioned with, investigation findings, I mean, HR professionals often walk into these kind of high stakes rooms. You got legal counsel there, C-suite, maybe business owners, maybe even outside investigators, depending on the nature of the case. What advice do you have for projecting confidence and credibility, even if maybe you're feeling a little intimidated?
Oh, gosh, for sure. And I was thinking about this situation again, more like really high stakes situations, right? When we do some of the, because sometimes we get calls from the global HR directors who say, Cindy, we need some help for some of our senior leaders who have been selected to present to the board in the corporate board meeting or whatnot. And there's a tricky message they need to deliver. Can you come in and assist? And so we've had some really exciting opportunities to work with speakers in these very high stakes situations. And we work a lot on what you're talking about, Natalie, that delivery. So, once we get a message, about 85% locked. So imagine they have 10 minutes in front of the board or something like that, or these investigators, they have 10 minutes to present their findings. Once that 10-minute message of the slide deck is about 85% dialed in, we will get them rehearsing the message. And then we refine it and tune it until it's 95%, and we leave room to ad-lib in the moment. So your question is, how do you help them with executive presence? One is kind of alluded to right now about practicing. It is not sufficient to think in your head about what you are going to say.
Yep.
And then think that you're going to do it well. Have you ever thought, listeners, oh my gosh, that came out so much differently than I had hoped? Right? Well, that's because we haven't gotten the words out into the air, and we haven't spoken them, and we haven't allowed our brain neurology, literally, to map the wording. And there is extreme power. And even if you're just taking your script that you've written, which I often recommend, I don't recommend using a script, relying on one, or memorization, but this is how we begin to master a message. You can take the piece of paper and read from it directly into a microphone and then play it back so that you can hear your own confidence. So there's magic in real excellence in preparation. I have a free webinar on my homepage that's called the Rehearsal Trifecta. Go find it. People do that and love it. The other pieces I would say are two more pieces. Be simple and be slow. So simple means don't use highfalutin words and, extremely technical language. Kitchen table language is best until you get into your groove and need all those meatier words. But we want simple language and short sentences. Shorter sentences. I'll often work with someone's script that they've written because we write differently than we speak. And I say, great, this is the right content. Now go through all 20 sentences and stick a period in the middle of every sentence. And now we have a script you might actually speak. And the third tip is about pacing. Being slower communicates confidence. If you speak slowly and loudly enough, you will exude more confidence in front of your stakeholders. Think about it, right? Rapid fire speakers, people who are the same pace throughout, it doesn't land as confident. You need to vary your pace, and you need to be good enough that you can be slower, because our great leaders in the world, right? Those amazing orators, they speak slower. And that lands. And that means you have to know your message.
Oh man, you are so spot on. That is really helpful. Yeah, if you don't speak with confidence, then the people that are in the room with you, they're not going to really have confidence in whatever you're recommending.
Right,
whatever
right.
the solution is.
And you can't stay there the whole time lest you might patronize them, right? It's very balancing of you don't want to be like the teacher and the students, right? But there are parts of your message that ought to be slower. And then your audience is usually ready to go with you. So the slow part's usually at the beginning, okay, like setting the stage, or at important portions of your talk later. But then you do need to vary the pace to keep people going with you lest they get audiences can get mad at you. Like you're not going to know about it until later. So watch those nonverbals that you're getting in the room, even in the virtual room. Pick up the pace if you need to. You need to be nimble enough to massage your message in the middle of it. And you can only do that when you are adequately prepared.
Agreed. And this is something that I learned years and years and years ago from a mentor of mine. She was a learning and development executive, and it was just my very early days of really learning about facilitation.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Management training, and absolutely essential. Super. Let's make this practical. Imagine an HR professional is recommending termination for a high-performing yet toxic employee. And let's say investigation findings certainly are substantiated, and past practice dictates that it really does warrant a separation, right? We need to term. Leadership is hesitant, though. How could your model really help them present that case of, let's say, separation of employment more persuasively?
Oh, great question. The letter O in the model is our friend in this situation, the first letter O of Orient Me. And that's, by the way, the most important letter in the model and the hardest letter in the model. It's also the one we spend the least amount of time speaking when we're in a presentation. So it's a very curious letter. Got to go get the book to figure out the details of why. But what I would say in this situation, one angle could be to go in and explore the cost of not. So sometimes people know what something is more easily when they realize what it is not. So, I am not a leadership coach. I am not an HR professional. I am an executive coach with specific skills in scientific storytelling. And I am someone who's called on by X, Y, and Z types of companies. I do not work with small town America. So if we do not terminate this employee, let me walk the path of what that's going to look like. Let me show you from a numbers perspective, a morale perspective, and a culture perspective, what we perceive to be the future for the next 6 to 12 months if we keep this person on.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. And using a little bit of storytelling scenario for persuading here, I think.
Yes.
Let's say scenario one is we do move forward and we separate, and then we minimize the risk perhaps of retaliation. We lower the risk factor for perhaps EEOC charge, or we lower the risk factor for litigation. Maybe you present scenario two. If we do not move forward to separation, here are several factors. Here are risk factors that we are going to have. And so what you're doing is presenting what could happen if we don't. I love it.
Yeah. And, it's really what you just said reminded me, we always have a choice in everything. And so often it can start with, we have at minimum 2 options. We can do something or we can do nothing. And I'm going to walk you through both paths. And then you're kind of giving the leadership the power to make the choice. And you are just presenting both paths. So we can do something or we can do nothing. And the choice is yours. Here's what I see from a very objective perspective, looking at this person's file, at the numbers, and this is where we are. What would you like to talk about next? Some of those open-ended questions after you reveal your O information will help them feel heard. Because I'm sure that the leadership, Natalie, you can maybe tell me more, like, what are they feeling when they have that sense that they shouldn't do this termination? What is the fear? Can you name it for me?
The fear is generally, especially someone who may have a lot of institutional knowledge and they're difficult to replace. They fear the impact on business results with the absence of that individual on the team. They also really fear, particularly if they're a rainmaker, someone in sales, they really fear even very immediate negative impacts to revenue. And they're, of course, accountable for those. Often they think about risk a little bit more longer term, and risk is a little kind of intangible.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that may happen, but what I know will happen is our sales will go down, and if our sales will go down, now my behind is in a sling with my bullet sectors. Often they process things through the impact on them personally and what they're accountable for in the business. And usually leadership, whether they're in operations or whether we're talking with someone who is in the C-suite that oversees it, operations sales are usually, I've said this in my podcast, if HR is going to have a hard time with different functional groups in a business, it's usually ops and sale.
Yeah, absolutely. They're the ones bringing in all the revenue, right?
They're driving the business through the doors and managing. But they often really think a little bit more short term in the immediate impacts to the business. HR is a little bit more of that long-term risk consultant. And so that's usually when they're a little bit at odds. So it really has to be persuasive regarding that risk factor to really help them recognize you can't trade maybe short-term impact for some really, really bad and expensive long-term impact.
Right. And I'm imagining this conversation, ideally, if possible, would be maybe even more than one, at least, conversation with the leadership to help them to thread the needle a bit. And I don't know, is that true, Natalie, or do you usually have to have it kind of one and done?
It's usually a one and done unless you really are experiencing some pushback and legal's not in the room. If necessary, then we may have to escalate and the next meeting involves legal. Well, in that case, what I would recommend that a lot of leaders forget is that, okay, if you've got one shot, at least send an email with a suggested agenda, the draft agenda, to warm people up to the topics you're going to cover, and don't mouse around, right? I mean, I know you can't and such, but these are the things we're going to explore. And our goal by the end of the meeting is to come to a consensus on the next action item by this date, or something to just frame via email. Anything that will thread the needle for the call itself so that people come in at least knowing what to expect. Agreed. Yeah.
So
there usually is a bit of a rhythm and structure to findings meetings, but what we can't assume in HR is that you have leaders who have really walked that walk, in HR. And if you've done any investigative work, I've been in, I don't even know how many. I lost count findings meetings over years. But, to us, it's a bit second nature, but you may be working with some newer leaders who really don't know what to expect. So I think you do have to frame that ahead of time. That's an excellent point that you made.
Yeah, absolutely. Running good meetings is a skill. I didn't realize how, let's just say, poor people can be about running good meetings. But we've created a new module called The Anatomy of a Meeting. And so many people want help with that because it wastes so much time when you don't do it well.
Absolutely. All right. Now, before we wrap up, Cindy, what is one piece of advice you'd give to HR professionals who really want to become more persuasive communicators, especially in maybe tough conversations?
I would go with that confidence that you need to build internally inside of yourself. When you're about to go in with a difficult situation, it is very easy to get unhinged personally on the interior, right? In your heart, in your head. And so making sure you are in a good headspace before you have one of those challenging conversations is critical. And there are two super fast thoughts I have about how to do that. And one is called the emotional thermometer and the other is called the head coach move. So the emotional thermometer is just this concept that we all are on it no matter what time of day it is. And when we get too high on our emotional thermometer and we're likely to act out in anger or be frustrated or be short, we aren't going to be a good listener up there at that 7 or above. And so if we are feeling heightened for any reason, maybe we just found out someone in our family has cancer God forbid, but should we hold that performance review meeting the next hour? Maybe we shouldn't because we're heightened. So keeping yourself on a 6 or below in that emotional thermometer, the lower the better. And understanding that the person across from you is probably going to be 6 or higher. And how do we manage that and think about them and have empathy? So that's a very fast touch point on the emotional thermometer. The other one is about us. When we're entering a meeting that's hard, we can, if you've ever seen Inside Out with joy and sadness and anxiety, have you ever seen the cartoon, Natalie, the Inside Out movie?
I've not seen that, no.
It's great. It's a great movie about the voices in our heads, okay? And joy is the voice in our heads who we can all say is like, that's our truest self. So like, Natalie, you have... and that's the head coach, okay? The Natalie who is the best, truest version of herself is the head coach. And we all have these little minions who come in and try to sort of take over the head coach, like anxiety and worry and what if this and what if that. And so I learned this from one of my coaches who said, when you feel those feelings come in and start to take over the stage, it's the head coach move. So you have to come back to yourself and say, I'm the head coach and I'm about to talk to this player. Anxiety, worry, sadness, whatever it is. And the key is you need to do it with compassion. And that's the part that really shook me up because I would normally yell at my other players in my head. I'd be like, get out of here, anxiety and sadness. You're not welcome here. But the head coach move is different. It's to respond to those voices compassionately because you know what? They're there for a reason. And it's more like this. You know what, anxiety? Thanks for showing up. I'm going to walk you right back over here to your seat on the bench. I've got this. I'm the head coach. The head coach is in charge of this conversation, and I've got this. And so it's just a way to reorient our own selves. And people have shared with me that that's really been powerful for them because you know what, HR professional or not, we're all human and we all struggle with certain kinds of conversations. So doing those confidence checks prior to going into those heated conversations and being in relationship with the person in front of you is critical. That's what I would offer.
This has been such a valuable conversation. Red light, green light, how top leaders present with polish, get buy-in, and become more influential. HR is definitely a field where persuasion is truly power, and your tools are really going to help many of our listeners to elevate their communication.
I hope so.
Audience, if you'd like to learn more about Cindy's work or pick up her book, just check out the show notes for links to Red Light, Green Light, and also Cindy's website. And then, as always, if you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this podcast with a colleague. And thanks for tuning in to the HR Investigations Podcast. So I'm Natalie Ivey. Until next time, keep asking the tough questions and always remember, the best investigation is the one you don't have to do. See you.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with the case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.